We're now on the bottom of Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph, about to turn to Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. Ezri Dever. The Mishnah says that if there's a pritza of a magefa in the city like Dever, then the Bnei Ir have to take upon themselves a fast. They have to declare a fast. Ir Hamotziah Chamesh Meos Ragli. If there's a city that has a population of 500 men, and 3 died on 3 consecutive days, 1 on each day. There was a death on each day. That's called Dever. And that's when we have justification to declare fast. Ir Gedola Motzia Chamesh Meos be Elef Ragli. Now we're talking about a city that has 3 times that population, 1,500. Yigon Kfar Akko, which is in fact the population of Kfar Akko. Yotzei Menu Tisha Mesim B'Shloshi Yom. 9 people died on 3 days. Zachar Zeh, Harezeh Dever, and we have to fast and be Masriya in that city. However, if 9 people died b'Yom Echad, the same number of people died, but they all died on 1 day. Ein Zeh Dever. That's not a magefa for which we should be fasting and blowing the shofar, etc. Because that's not huchzak b'kach. We need a chazak. It could be that there was a mikra, some sort of accident, and 9 people died on 1 day, but we need to establish chazaka day after day. On the other hand, Ir Ktana, if you have a smaller city, Hamotzia Chamesh Meos Ragli, it only has a population of 500, that's 1/3. Kigon Kfar Amiko, V'yotziv Men Shlosha Mesim B'Shlosha Yamin, all that died was the total number of 3, but they died on 3 consecutive days. After Zeh, Harezeh Dever. That is Dever. That's a real bona fide magefa. We have the chazak of 3 consecutive days, and therefore Mis'anu Masriya. However, V'yom Echad, if the 3 people had died on 1 day, or Bi'arba Yamin, or until they died, it took 4 days past, Ein Zeh Dever. That's not considered a terrible Dever for which Masriya Olav and Mis'anan. So it means that if there were 3 that died on 1 day, or alternatively 3 that died over the course of 4 days, that's not a chazaka. That's only a mikra. Drokakti was a city, Ira Motzia Chamesh Meos Ragli, it was made up of a population of 500 men. And despite the fact that they all died 3 people on 1 day, Gozer Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda Taanit. Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Chizda, the name is important. He was Gozer Taanit. Amalo Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, a different Rav Nachman. He said to him, "You are paskening against the Mishnah and the Bryce. According to the latter, only if 3 died over the course of 3 days. Ukiman, which shita did you paskin like? It must be Rabbi Meir." And here we have a brilliant analogy. Now, there's a shara muad, chayav nezek shalem. It means the shara was nogeach 3 times. And the question is, what happens if now, the normal case, the classic shara muad, it was nogeach 3 days consecutively, 1 negich on each of 3 days, on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. But Rabbi Meir has a chiddush here that even if all 3 negichos took place on 1 day, then based on the logic of a kal v'chomer, for sure the animal is a shara muad. Richek negichos of when he spreads out his negichos over the course of 3 different days, chayav is nezek shalom as a shara muad, is care of negichos of lo kol. How much more so if he was nogeach 3 of them on 1 day? In other words, what Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is saying, based on analogy here to Rabbi Meir, is that I'm going to paskin that there's going to be a tainus here because of Ever. Because if 3 people died on 3 consecutive days, that's called dever. That warrants Taanit, etc. Then how much more so if they all 3 died on one day? So now you are poskening like Rabbi Meir, but you are not accepting the sheet of the Mishnah and the price that you need 3 consecutive days. 3 deaths on one day is not sufficient. And this is what Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak was analyzing, the Gzeira of Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chizda to require a Taanit. Amalei Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chizda, when Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chizda heard the brilliant analysis of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he said to him, Rav Nachman, Leikumar, why are you sitting in the back of the Beis Medrash amongst the, like the riffraff, so to speak? Leisei legabon, you should be sitting up front in a makom mechuban, because you brilliantly justified and understood my gzeira of Taanit in a case where 3 deaths took place all on one day, with the logic of Rabbi Meir that richek negichos of kirev lo kolchki. Amalei. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says the following: Tnina, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yossi Omer lo makom shel adam mechabdo, ela adam mechabed is makomo. When you put a person in a certain place, put him up front, from Israel, that doesn't give him cover. But rather, a person gives cover to a makom. If an adam chashuv is sitting in a certain place, that generates cover to that makom. Meaning, a person should always go far, far away from gaiva, and he should not have aspirations to sit amongst the gedolim. That's srara. He himself knows that he's not royal. And if he was roy bi'atzmo, then even though he's in the back of the classroom, that itself is going to generate cover. I remember in Rav Soloveitchik's class, there was a certain rabbi who sat all the way in the back. But when he got up, he used to sit on his knee, so that Rav Soloveitchik would see him higher up, and then he would ask questions and in a very brilliant way. So the fact that you're sitting in the back doesn't mean anything. Wherever you're sitting and you're an Adam Chashuv, you'll be Machabi the Makom. And we saw that by our Sinai, as long as the Shekhinah goes much at Shekhinah Shruya Olav. In other words, on the day of Matan Torah itself, Torah says, we have Kedushas HaMakom, and the Har is considered Gadol, because the Shekhinah that is hovering over the Har. But Nistalka Shekhinah Mimenu, as soon as they left the environs of the Har Sinai for the Matan Torah, then immediately the Shekhinah left, and anyone could go up the mountain after the shofar was blown. Because this Kiyah Shofar reveals that this Siluk Shekhinah, the Shekhinah has already gone back up to the higher realms. And once the Shekhinah was Nistalka of Minahar, then Batla Kedushasa. Its Kedusha is completely gone. And therefore, Nitan La'alos Ol. The old Moed, they would take the tabernacle, build it, construct it, then take it apart, disassemble it during the 40 years in the middle. When it was structured, it was up. The Torah says, the Yishalchu min hamachne kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tomi l'nefesh, meaning the area of the oil is endowed with Shekhinah, with the Kedusha of Machne Shekhinah, which generates an Isur of Knisas Sarua v'chol Zav v'chol Tomi l'nefesh. But afterwards, Huglulu haparoches, they would roll up the paroches of the old Moed when they were traveling. Is Hutru Zavim u'mitzoroim li kanes l'sham. And at that point, there was a total heter to bring the Tmeim inside that makom where the old Moed stood. But anyway, we see that the makom is only mechuber because of the Shekhinah. The makom in and of itself is not machabed anymore. So if you have an Odom Choshev, he's machabed the makom. It's not the makom; it's machabed him. The makom doesn't generate any covet for him, and therefore, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak proved that even if he sits in any place, wherever he sits, that's going to be machabed the makom. If you go to a different place, that's not going to give you covet. It's not the makom that gives you covet. Amalei Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chisda says to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Yihachi, if what you say is true, Nekum Ano L'Gabi Mar. Nekum Ano L'Gabi Mar. I'm going to stand up in my place and I'm going to come to your place. I'm going to sit with you in the back because I want to be close to you and speak to you in Divrei Torah. I realize how brilliant you are. That analysis of applying Rabbi Meir's logic of Kiriv Negichos of Kolchkein, that if 3 people died on one day, we certainly have to be Gozer Taanit. Amalei, so Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Mutav Yavo Mona ben Pras, Eitzel Mona ben Mon. Val Yavo Mona ben Mona, Eitzel Mona ben Pras. Rav Nachman was the son of Yitzchak. Notice he was not the son of Rav Yitzchak. His father did not have smicha. He was not nismach lo ra. And that's called a Mona ben Pras. Mona means a certain shear, and a Pras is half of that shear, half of a Mona. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, because his father was not musmach lo ra, compared himself to a Mona ben Pras, the son of a half. However, you, Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chisda, are the son of a Nismach Lo Ra. You're a Mona ben Mona. And it makes more sense that I, as a Mona ben Pras, should come and sit with you, and you are a Mona ben Mona, rather than the other way around. Now, Besura, Habas de Barta, there was a Magef of Dever in a place called Surah, but in the neighborhood in that city where Rav lived, there was no Magef, miraculously. Savrumine, the people thought, Mishum Schusei de Rav de Nafesh. It must be because of the great Tzuyot of Rav that God did a miracle, and in Rav's Shchuna there was no Devon. However, Chazule Bechelma, they saw a vision, probably a Malach came to them, to the people of that city of Surah, in a dream, and told them that Rav de Nafesh Schusei Tuva, Rav has much more greater Schuyot, and Hamilsa Zutra Leila, that this small miracle that in his neighborhood they were not affected by ever, that would not be appropriate for the greatness of Rav. He deserves greater Nisa. So don't think that what's going on now, this miracle, this small miracle, is because of Rav. We're not going to waste Rav's chuyot for miracles on this small miracle. We have much greater rewards for it. But rather for the schus of another member of that neighborhood. And we don't know that person's name, he's anonymous, but look at his actions. Vilas Chasod. Ishayel Mara Uzvila. He had a kind of gemach for kvura, for burial. And what was in this gemach? He would lend out, free of charge, a makush, which is a ma'adir, some sort of a spade, and chafira, a kaf shtucha in base yad orach, Rashi interprets it. In any event, these were the kelim that were necessary to bury the dead. And therefore, Mida Keneged Mida, schus that he would be so dedicated to burying the dead, he was saved from death in his neighborhood during that Magef of Devon. Another story, very similar. Be Drokart Havis the Delicta. In the city of Drokart, a fire broke out. Ubishvivusa de Rav Huna was one of the greats of all time. Lo havis delik. There was no fire in his geged, in his shchuna. Sovramine, they all thought, this the Rav Huna, the Nafesh has such great skuyot, therefore the miracle came about and there was no sreifa, the fire did not spread into his neighborhood. Rav Huna was osek b'Torah iman talmidim, and they learned day and night. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Kol bayisha ein nishmar bo divrei Torah b'layla eish al chalto, and Michal Lavat Hashmei Haim, that Abayis should Ichmon bo divrei Torah b'layla ein eish al chlasa. Therefore, they thought in that neighborhood they had the skus that protected them, so that there wouldn't be an eish ochla. But Eschazule B'chalma was revealed to them in a dream. Hi Zutra. This is a small miracle. We shouldn't waste this miracle on the schus of Rav Huna. He has a much greater schus. Ella mishum dahi isa, but rather because of one tzaddik, one woman who lived in that neighborhood, and she did such great charity work. The mechameres tamura, she would heat up her oven. Umeshayle l'shivirusa. Again, she used her own logs, which were expensive, to heat up the oven, and then she would give the oven to any member of her neighborhood to bake in that hot oven, so that they, the other members of that community, could save themselves the price and the outlay of the hasaka, that those logs that they needed to burn the oven with their own eitzim. So they would save their eitzim. And again, mida keneged mida. In the schutz that she heated up her oven for others, they were saved from the oven, the fire that spread. Amulei Rabbi Yehuda. One time they told Rabbi Yehuda, the asu kamse. Kamse is a kind of a locust that could actually attack the grains and destroy the entire crop. Gazer Tanisa. So he enacted a fast. Amrulei, the members of the community said, Loka mafsidon. There's no need to go that far. You're overreacting, because right now the locusts have not destroyed our crop. They're not eating from our tzvua. And there's no need for Xeris Taanit. Amalahu, Zavda Aisu Badayu. Did the locusts bring with them a Zavda? Some sort of a like a traveling pocketbook where a lunchbox, I would say. And the lunchbox was there, like from the Seder L'derech, that you're saying that you don't have to worry about these locusts. They're going to feed you the mizonos that they brought in their own little satchel. He was being very facetious. He was talking to them to Lashon Tzachos. And he wanted to tell them that this dever, this locust, this form of locust, will certainly at the end eat up that food. If he hasn't eaten them yet, he'll get to them. And therefore, we better fast very quickly. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda, the Ika Mosana Bechazire. You should know that there's a magefa that has affected the swan and the pigs are dying, and Gazer Tanis. What's going on? I mean, what does that affect the human being? Why is the human being in danger just because the swine is, suffering from a magefa? And the answer is, Nema Kasava Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds a makkah mishuleches mimin echad. When there's clearly a makkah that's coming from the heavens, and it's impacting on one min, in this case, a magefa of chazirin, is therefore kimishulachas mikol aminin. Even a human being is included in that gzeira of that makkah. It's very dangerous, and therefore we have to fast. So the Gemara says, no. That's not how you should interpret the decision of Rabbi Yehuda to be gozer at Taanit. Not because you go from one min to the other, but because, and this is very surprising, there's a very striking similarity between the pig and the human being, as far as this makkah is Magefa is concerned. Shiny Chaziri, it's not that you go from one min that's in danger to another min, but rather in the case of Chazirim, if there's a Magefa and Chazirim, that's a very unique situation, very dangerous situation. Why? The Damyan my Yayu, their Bnei Me'ayim Libnei Inshi. This is all based on a Gemara in Masechet Chulin, on Daf Mem Beis, and the Sugi on Daf Nun, that the innards of the pig, the Me'ayim, the Kishkis, they don't have what's called a keres pnimi, an inner stomach, like most other animals have, and therefore they're similar in that biological structure to the human being. And if there's magef amongst the chazirim, that could be very dangerous. That's indicative of a very dangerous situation for Bnei Adam, and therefore we should fast. Shmuel. One time they told Shmuel, who lived in the city of Narda, in Bavel, Ika Motsana Bechozoi. In another place, there's a Magefa. That place is called Bechozoi. The Gazar Tainis, and yet Shmuel, even though Bechozoi was quite of a distance from Narda, he enacted and declared a Tainis in Narda. So the people in Narda said to him, V'merache, there should be no chashash from Magefa here. There's a Magefa that's affected Bechozoi. Omar, and Shmuel responded to them, Leka ma'abara hocha de posik. The fact that it's Rachel doesn't mean that it's not going to travel from one city to the other, like we saw in our time with COVID. If there were waterways that would separate our location in our doi from the Magefa and Bechozoi, that would be one thing. Then we don't have to worry that the Magefa is going to reach Nardoi. But there's nothing separating, there are no waterways that separate Nardo from Bechozoi, and therefore a Magefa that breaks out in Bechozoi could be dangerous. But Nardoi, it warrants fasting. Another story. Omru Leila Rav Nachman lived in Bavel. Ika Mosana Ba'arad Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael is a Magefa. Gazar Taanit. Wait a minute. Bavel is very far from Eretz Yisrael. The Omar declared Im Gvira. Gvira is the Chashuva, which is Eretz Yisrael, and then Loka. He's suffering from a Magefa. And then Shivcha, which is a lower echelon, that's already Chutz La'aretz, Lo Kolshkein, how much more so, that it might get struck by this Magefa. And therefore we have to fast here in Bavel because of the chashash, the fear, the suspicion that maybe the Magefa will spread and reach even into Bavel. So Gemara is now medayik from the words of Rav Nachman. Taima, the reason why Rav Nachman says we should be going to Taanit, even though it's very far away, is because of Gvira and Shivcha. Because of this Kal V'chomer, that if there's Gvira, which is the Chashuv, which is Eretz Yisrael, gets Loka, how much more so the Shivcha gets Loka? The implication of Rav Nachman's statement is that Shivcha v'Shivcha, if you have two cities in Chutz La'aretz, and one of them is suffering from Magefa, we should not implement a Xeris Tainus in the other city, because they're both in Chutz La'aretz. It's Shivcha and Shivcha. V'ha, Amru Leili Shmuel, what are we going to do to reconcile this with the story of Shmuel? Ika Mosna Bechazoi, v'Gaza Tanisa bin Arda. That Shmuel saw that there was a Magefa in Bechazoi, which is in Bavel, and he was Gozer Tainus in his city in Arda, even though both Bnei Bechazoi and Nardoya both, Shivcha b'Shivcha. So you see that in a Shivcha b'Shivcha case, two Ayoros and Chutzas, and one was affected by the Magefa, one not, then we go to a Tainus. The Gemara answers, in other words, just to review, we were medayek from Rav Nachman that we would not be gozer Tainus in the case of Shivcha of two cities in Chutzos, and yet Shmuel did exactly that. Shiny Hassam, Gemara says in general, as a rule, if there's Magefa in one city in Chutz La'aretz, we're not afraid in the other city. But here is a different kind of situation because of the connection, at least transportation-wise, between Beichal Zoi and Nardoi. Came in the Ika Shayarasa, there are Shayaros, there are caravans that travel from Beichal Zoi to Narda. They might bring this disease with them. It's like they're closing the airports here, the Levi V'Asya Badeh, that the Magefa will, so to speak, accompany these Shayaros, these groups, and the Magefa will now be porates even in Ardoi, because it's being carried and transported by these Shayaros. I'll read the English here. It says, the plague can accompany and travel along with these caravans that go and travel regularly between Beichal Zoi and Narda. The distance between them, therefore, is not significant. But if there weren't caravans, then Shmuel would not have decreed a fast. He agrees with Rav Nachman that distance is a barrier against the spread of a plague, and that's called Shivcha v'Shivcha. And in the note here, he says, in summary, if a plague strikes an area, all the surrounding areas declare fast, but distant regions need not declare fast unless there are caravans connecting them to the affected area. However, if a plague strikes Eretz Yisrael, all countries that hear about it must fast. But that only applies when all of Eretz Yisrael is afflicted with the plague. But if the plague is limited to specific areas within Eretz Yisrael, then in Chutz La'aretz they need not fast. This is where we'll stop, and Amir Hashem will record Chaf Beis and the end of Chaf Aleph, Moment Beis, which is the daf for Shabbos later on during the course of the day. Let me just take this opportunity to wish you a Shabbat Shalom.